Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're delighted to be here with all of you tonight to celebrate What Fresh Hell Is This? Perimenopause, Menopause, Other Indignities, and You. We are really excited about this book. At Charis, we've actually hosted 3 discussions about menopause in the last several months. So this is an important and timely conversation, but we're really excited because this is Heather Corinna's book. Heather, who uses they, them pronouns, is a dedicated queer feminist activist, author, educator, artist, teacher, organizer, and so much more. They help create, cultivate, and support positive growth and change in so many people. Heather is the founder, director, designer, and editor of the web organization Scarletine, which I will just editorialize for a minute and say is the resource that we send people to when they are like, how do I teach my kids about sex? How do I teach my kids about body development? We say, okay, just go. And obviously, we're booksellers, so we encourage people to buy books. But if they only look at one web resource, we send them to Scarletine. Scarletine is the first truly comprehensive sex, sexuality, and relationships education site and resource for young people. And it has provided millions of young people accurate and inclusive information and support every year for the last 20 plus years. Heather is also the author of the inclusive, comprehensive, and progressive sex, sexual health, and relationships book for young adult, SEX, the All You Need to Know Sexuality Guide to get you through your teens and 20s, as well as Wait, What? A comic book guide to relationships, bodies, and growing up for older middle readers and younger teens. And of course, the book we are here tonight to celebrate is What Fresh Hell Is This? We're joined by Soraya Chemaly, who uses she, her pronouns. Soraya is an award-winning author and activist. She writes and speaks frequently on topics related to gender norms, inclusivity, social justice, free speech, sexualized violence, and technology. The former executive director of the Representation Project and director and co-founder of the Women's Media Center Speech Project, she has long been committed to expanding women's civic and political participation. Soraya is also the author of Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger, which was recognized as a best book of 2018 by the Washington Post, Fast Company, Psychology Today, and NPR, and has been translated into multiple languages. She's a contributor to several anthologies and a co-producer of a WMC PSA highlighting the effects of online harassment on women in politics in America. As an activist, Ms. Chemaly spearheaded successful campaigns challenging corporations to address online hate and harassment, restrictive content moderation and censorship, and institutional biases that affect free speech. So we're delighted to be here with both of you tonight. And I'm delighted for all of you who are watching at home to please ask any questions you would like via our Ask a Question box, which is in the bottom center of the screen. If you're on your phone and that's hard to find, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll move them over. Heather really does welcome questions tonight, so feel free. And also, if you like, shout out where you're watching from, how many months you have been in perimenopause, anything you want to share about your menopause journey. We're here for it and delighted to have you all joining us tonight. Thank you so much.
Yeah, a row of primal screaming throughout the audience to be absolutely acceptable and completely understandable.
Well, I'm delighted to be here with you, Heather. Thank you for asking me to do this with you.
Oh, I love that you're here.
I just want to reiterate what ER said. I remember when I first found out about Scarletine, I was so excited. I was so happy to see it, and just thinking about these things and writing about these things, and we might come to this at some point, but I don't think a lot of people think about the kind of information that you've shared for years, how critically important it is to people. And I just want to say thank you for that.
Well, thank you. You're welcome.
So I think we should just jump right in here. You have written several books, many books. Tell us why this one and in this way.
Oh gosh. You know, some people might already know this story at this point, but I love my editor that I worked with on this book and that I work with on SEX, Renee Sedliar. And when it was time to write, and you know, when she was available for another book, she said, "Give me your list." And I had this whole long list of titles, and at the very end of it, because I was having like a, you know, a terrible, no good, very bad menopause day, I said, oh, I could write a stupid book about perimenopause. And I was not totally serious. But it got sent to her on also a very bad perimenopause day. And she said, that one.
Yeah.
And I said, oh no.
Now I have to write it.
And so, you know, and then you do the thing you do where you're like, do I take it back or do I go for it? And, you know, I mean, one of the things I think that's interesting is that, of course, you know, the other books that I've written, I wasn't able to write them when I was in the thing, you know, like they're not like, you know, by virtue of what I do and the way that I do it with young people, I have to have a very specific kind of boundaries, and things have to be not personal, you know? Yeah. And so, you know, just from a writing point of view, being able to actually write something while I'm in it, however maddening that is, especially because, you know, I certainly also didn't plan on like perimenopause plus pandemic lockdown.
Yeah.
Not my favorite way to write a book. Just want to go on the record with that one. Hope that won't be happening again. So there's that, you know, but also like in some ways that, you know, I guess it's not really that different than the other kind of work that I do, right? Mm-hmm. Is that, you know, it was a current kind of information that was difficult to find, certainly impossible to find inclusively, like it just didn't exist in an inclusive way. You know, difficult to find, not impossible, but still difficult to find in an intersectional way, in a way where the, you know, the science and the medical information was, you know, translated for the rest of us, right, who maybe don't have 6 degrees or 1. You know? So, you know, in some ways it's not that different.
So when you and I first spoke, when you were researching this, we talked about the kind of mystification of all of this.
Yeah.
I certainly waltzed into this situation with zero information.
Same. I mean,
zero information. And I remember thinking, well, and I had two pregnancies, and also remember thinking, why didn't any woman I know really ever tell me anything about this? My mother, my aunts, my grandmothers, just women in my life. I was like, no information, you know, and that happened during pregnancy, and it happened for perimenopause. And I was just blindsided. And I understand intellectually all the cultural and social and even political reasons why that would be. But what was your experience? Because I think this book is just such a wonderful resource for people. I would have loved this book when I went through this.
You know, I think that's, you know, there's no universal experiences with anything, let alone with this, but that's really common.
Yeah.
You know, that experience. And it's for a lot of different reasons, right? Like, I mean, obviously one of the biggest ones is shame. It's for the same reason that, you know, a lot of people who have a uterus and ovaries don't know a lot about their entire bodies, right? Like, but there's also other reasons too. I mean, kind of culturally for a lot of us, especially any of us that have grown up, you know, anything lower than middle class, a lot of us come from a long line of people who either didn't live long enough to reach menopause, or who had, you know, forced or, you know, essential hysterectomies. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, I mean, there's like, so, or, you know, who went through this. And I mean, I think, and we've talked about this kind of thing before, who went through this And the cultural message that they had is that this is one of these things, especially when it comes to the emotional experience of this, right? That you're not entitled to have feelings about and to talk about and to talk about for yourself or for anybody, period. Right. It is a thing for you to just suck up and get through and not complain, and certainly not complain, right. Forbid that you complain or say that you're suffering. And I think if that's the experience that somebody has, the idea that then you tell somebody else about it, it's just part and parcel that then if you don't talk about it for yourself, you don't tell others.
You don't tell anybody else. Yeah, I think too, I do think that there's no overstating the element of shame, which begins way earlier, right? I mean, we know that starting pre-adolescence, women, girls, people who, as you say, just have bodies that they don't understand, have never been taught about. And I think, I'm really curious. I think that in the last 15 years, honestly, do work like the work you're doing, there's so much more openness. There's so much more honesty. And I'm hoping that ages in all of these communities so much more diverse, so much more open about people's experiences and their bodies and their gender identities and their sexual identities. Are you seeing any of that yourself? Do you think that that's true?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that that's one of the reasons why you're seeing more conversation about it right now, right? Like at the beginning, talking about how there were just 3 conversations at the store this month. I think, yeah, like, right, that is what we're seeing right now. I mean, I'm not the only one doing this kind of work, right? There's one of kind of the best things about looking at the book and look at the resources specifically at the back of the book, or even if you just kind of pay attention to, I don't know, I've been a little off Twitter, but when I'm back, people that I'm calling out their work right now, like for sure, I think, we're in the middle of a lot of this changing, and some of it's about talking about it, period. And then some of it's about changing the conversation, right? Like both talking about it, but then changing, certainly, expanding and widening and diversifying the conversation as well.
Yeah. It seems to me too that this is happening in tandem with the general destigmatization of periods, right? So people who have periods, there's so many different types of conversations happening that are related, really intersectional conversations, right? We're seeing it globally, we're seeing it locally, and you and I talked about this, but maybe we could shift to the way institutions are being forced to grapple with this. The idea that people are in pain, or that this is part of life, and that life should acknowledge that, and our institutions should acknowledge that. Could you talk about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that's another thing that we're seeing right now. One of my favorite things, and I'm going to sound so like a starstruck American when I say this, but one of my favorite things that I found when I was researching the work part of this book was a guide made for employers in the trades, right? So blue collar employer in Scotland for menopausal employees. And this thing is thick. This thing is like 75 pages. It is like, I read it, like, I don't even know, I was almost weeping. It was one of the beautiful things that I've ever seen. And again, this is
amazing, right? You're like, this is amazing.
Employees, right? Like, and here in the States, that's what? Like that's just, it's considered still, we're behind, right now. Like considered this huge thing for, people in corporate America, in the higher echelons of corporate America, to be looking for things who, let's be real about it, are some of the least, already have the most accommodations when it comes to a lot of things with this, right? Like nobody's telling them that they have to, wear a polyester uniform, or that they have to drive for 8 hours without peeing, right? Like, I mean, like,
Right.
it's not happening, you know, so, but it's, you know, I do think that this is one of these things where, especially from an international perspective, that's happening, right? Just like we're having happen with breastfeeding, you know, for example, I think is another really good example of this. And just like, I mean, just like we're having happen with disability accommodation.
Yes.
Also, I mean, you see the glacial pace at which that has happened culturally. So
Yeah.
but I do think that it's definitely happening. I think that it's one of these things where also too, when we look at, it's going to, you know, who the boss is going to change a lot of what this is. If the bosses at a place are all people who themselves are going through or who have recently gone through menopause, then yeah, you can bet your butt that the policies are going to change.
But as you point out, the higher up any institutional food chain you go, the fewer people there are who actually experience this. And, you know, I think, again, when, you know, during some of our conversations, we talked about this idea, and I think this is global. I think it's particularly strong in the US, though. We're deeply religious. Of all of the sort of dominant countries in the world, we're by far the most religious, right? And I think that affects a lot of these cultural mores. But, you know, this idea that there's an ideal worker and that the ideal worker is a cisgendered man who is, you know, walking and talking on his own, unencumbered in any way. And he has really, right, like unencumbered in any way. And he has a panoply of support around him.
Right.
And that is the norm that is established in our workplaces and our schools and our institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit about, can you talk about the idea that women, especially, I'm thinking in terms of historically, right? Because I think there's a lot going on now. Even the controversy over saying things like people with periods or people with uteri. I mean, all of that, you know, that's a whole mind shift. Some people get it, some people refuse, they don't want to. But can you talk about if you have any examples of the kinds of changes or adaptations or even confrontations that are happening in corporate spaces over some of these issues? And if you don't want to, we don't have to at all.
Yeah, that one's a little outside my, you know, I'm not a corporate person. It's like so outside my life that I tend to kind of.
Well, I know, that's probably wise. Okay, but let's shift to a question.
Oh, okay.
Well, no, I mean, I was just thinking one of the ideas I think that I think address and that I addressed in my book too was this idea that these deviations from the norm constitute disability, disease, you know, they're treated in that way as opposed to actually being the norm, right? The fact that, more people in the world menstruate than not, you know? And so is there anything about that? And I'll say this because of your work with scarletine. I mean, this starts really early, way before we get to perimenopause and menopause, right? This idea that our bodies have to be normal in a certain way.
Right.
Is there anything that comes to mind in that way to you?
Well, I mean, that's always tricky from a disability standpoint in the first place, right? I mean, classifying disability is normal, right?
That's right.
Especially at a certain age, disability is more normal than not having disability. So what's disability and what isn't and what's normal?
Right.
And it all gets very mushy. And then I think it's, you know, with perimenopause and menopause, it also gets particularly tricky because, you know, in and of itself, like say menstruation, right? Of course, perimenopause and menopause are not disabilities, but just like with menstruation, perimenopause and menopause for some people can create, can elicit, or can worsen disabilities, right? Menstruation for some people means endometriosis, right? Perimenopause for some people means that your MS is reactivated, right? And so that's another one where I think it's a tricky tangle. And I think that I think the hard thing when we're kind of looking at things about this idea that we decide what adaptations and accommodations we make based on what's normal and what isn't normal is kind of in and of itself like a problem of ableism.
Yes,
right?
I agree. At the heart of everything, right?
Culture, we wouldn't, that's not a question, right? In a culture that isn't ableist. In a culture that isn't ableist, we accommodate what needs accommodating.
Right.
Rather than saying, right, well, this is normal. We of course need to make room for this versus this is not necessarily a norm, so maybe we don't. So, it's, and I think that that's one of those things where it's like, this is particularly an excellent time of life to be like, we need to learn that lesson right now, right? Especially at a time of life when, when menopause is happening, is when, for people who already don't have one, acquired disability is also happening, right? So it's like, here it all is. And it's also this thing where, especially if you have a hard time with this and you come kind of crashing against all of these barriers that make it so hard. It should still be hard, even when you get kind of help and support and accommodation. But that's the really hard part, right? Even if you have the hardest of the hard time in this, the hardest of the hard time in this is being unsupported, unaccommodated. And, the stuff that, in fact, going into what the meat of what you said, really, when we talk about this too, especially moving interpersonally, right? That's really what gets people with physical impacts, what gets people with emotional impacts is when they are interpersonally and emotionally unsupported,
totally dismissed. There's a comment here from Melissa that I want to go to, because we were talking earlier about emotions, strong emotions, and the overlap between our books is really a Venn diagram of the stereotypes that really hurt people. They really hurt people, right? And in this case, whether it's adolescence or perimenopause and menopause, there's always this particularly, I think, gendered and sexist default to, oh, it's just her hormones, which is a sort of all-purpose dismissal for a 13-year-old girl or a 50-year-old woman. It's just, it completely invalidates, minimizes, trivializes a time of life in which everything is changing. Bodies are changing, relationships are changing, status in society is changing. So can you talk about those sort of flashpoints, maybe as counterpoints to each other, and what it means to be dismissed in that way?
Sure. I mean, well, for one, I think that it's tricky because, of course, because of that, most of us have had to be dishonest about the times when it was, right? Yeah. It was mostly hormones. Then we were never allowed to be honest. So first of all, it's a trap, right? It's a setup. If you say, and especially because you're made to say it's either all hormones or all something else, which is ridiculous, of course, because really what it all is our hormones, reactions to our situations, to our interpersonal, it's everything, right? But the thing is too, is that it's just, whatever emotional response we have or whatever physical response we're having, for one, like how these have a basis in our circumstances, in our life circumstances, and one of the things that's particularly pernicious about when people say that around menopause is that we know that people with more trauma and people with less support have a harder menopause. And, is that hormones? Yes, your hormones, mostly cortisol, not your sex hormones, do things when you have a shitty life, and that's right. That's just, and that's, but you know what? If you didn't have a shitty life, then it wouldn't be about your hormones, you know.
Right.
So it does do the thing where it erases the root of what's really happening. The root of what's really happening isn't your hormones. It's your life conditions, including the asshole that somehow is in them saying it's just your fucking hormones.
Yeah. So there is Kristen just said how much of this is interplay of hormones and emotional responses to being really fed up with putting up with shit.
Exactly. And
that's exactly right.
Untangle.
I have to say that in my experience, I don't know about yours, I have seen many women come to this stage of life and genuinely be unwilling to accept what they accepted before. They are fed up. And I think it's very destabilizing for people as individuals, and also for their relationships, but probably ultimately a lot healthier.
Yeah.
You know, and so one thing here that I wanted to respond to in the questions, which is interesting. I'm wondering if in your research you found an answer to this. The question is, do you think perimenopause, a word I had never heard until I was 30, and menopause are starting at younger ages? And I know that's true for menstruation, but do you have any sense of that for perimenopause and menopause?
I didn't see anything that suggested that. No.
Yeah.
And everybody, and it's for a while, not everybody, but within a like 2 to 3 year range, it's pretty much been the same around, 50, 51 for just about everybody,
Right.
a group of earlies, but on the whole for decades.
Yeah.
Decades and decades. So
did you find that there were any environmental impacts of GMOs and other things? A follow-up question to that.
They don't have, they just don't, I don't think they have that yet.
Right. The research isn't there.
But the other thing that I'd also say about the earlier is that, another thing to know about that is that it's really, we know when perimenopause ends. That's super clear, right? Like we have a clear date of when that ends. It's when it's been a year since your last period.
Right.
It's very tangible. It's the only tangible thing in all of this. We have no way of knowing when it started, and it's so murky about being in it, both how it feels and again how much information we even know to have, and all where people diminish it, and then everybody's told to suck it up. I mean, and the avalanche of your life that's often going on at the same time, so it's hard to even know that something else is happening. That even if it was happening earlier, I think we're still not in the state right now where everybody has enough information where we don't even know that. You know what I'm saying?
Is the information actually being gathered? Do you think the research is really improved?
Most studies are happening. It's just that we would need people younger and younger to start actually getting this information, right? Like, and for there to be more and more information, and that's been happening. So, see, I mean, and then of course, I mean, the onus also kind of is on us, right, as a generation, because the one thing, and you said it coming into this, right, that we hear again and again and again from people of our generation is nobody told me. Like, I've been in the middle of writing something for Scarlettine to be like, just so you know, everybody says this, so you don't get to say this because I'm telling you right now. So the onus is also on us to. I'm sorry, it kind of sucks because the other people didn't do it before. But you have to break that chain, right? Like, and be the ones that are like, hey, just so you know. And that can be as simple as just not keeping what's happening to you. I mean, that's how I play it from the young people that you're around. That's all. Right. It doesn't have to be
open about it. Right.
Downer like, today we're talking about menopause.
I mean, I thought about this the other day when we were talking again. I was laughing because I thought, have you ever considered a Scarlettine for people over 50? Because also, if you could address changes in sexuality, I think a lot of people may be caught off guard because they don't know, and they might have experiences that they just didn't anticipate.
It mostly gets better. So actually, yeah, that's the good news. It mostly just keeps getting better for everybody. So
well, that's good news.
Bumps in the road tend to be bumps in the road. I mean, the good news is that's one of the few places where, aside of temporarily, most people don't get super hung up. It's the other stuff.
Yep. Well, speaking of the other stuff,
I haven't thought about that because I'm a little busy.
Yes, you are. So among the other stuff, I think a lot of people also have this question, which is anxiety, depression, emotional and behavioral issues. There are a couple of comments in two different areas, but the question here, the last one is, recently I experienced totally disabling anxiety for several days during a big life transition. After a decade of perimenopause, I'm now in my third year periods, dramatically slowing down. Emotional behavioral disability remains taboo, and it was incredibly awkward to address my disability at work. What does research say about severe anxiety, depression with menopause, and does it ease as the transition completes? Oh, please say yes.
Yeah, it says that it's really common and way more common than we all.
Right.
Same.
That the incidence of it during perimenopause.
And here's the super beautiful news, which is that if it showed up with perimenopause or got worse with perimenopause, by and large, it will resolve shortly after menopause. That is one of the, there again, there are not a lot of universals. There are not a lot of, with most people. That is actually one of them, which is that just about any kind of mood disorder that either only presents itself in peri or gets way, way worse, shit goes back down. Mental health improves after menopause for just about everybody.
Mm-hmm. So did you find any globally, did you look at any cultural differences? I know, for example, I read, or maybe you told me this, that women in Japan tend to have far fewer sort of perimenopausal and menopausal experiences related to a variety of things, including diet. Did you find any of that?
I kind of took like an overall national view. So I didn't really kind of look and try and pinpoint cultures, especially because a lot of these studies wind up reported on outside the culture that they were done in with and by white people in Western culture, and have stuff put on them and are like taken out of cultural context. And so it's always, and I kind of had a paragraph in the book where I say that I really feel like for somebody that wants to know about a specific culture's kind of take on menopause, the way to go would be to go find somebody from that culture,
right, and talk
research on menopause within the lens of the culture. So I am not an anthropologist. I am not. It's just not.
Just to get some sort of basic facts out of the way, the average duration of perimenopause is what? Is there one?
No. I wish that I could say. I mean, my editor was like, Heather, you can't give people 2 pages of everyone's estimate of what it is to show how angry you are that everyone is, because I want to kill you. And I'm like, all right. But literally, like, everywhere I read, it'd be like 1 to 4 years. 2 to 25 years. I mean, like, everyone has a different answer.
Everyone has a different answer, right? I mean, I remember being very surprised to hear 10 years. At that point, I was like, slit my wrist now. Like, what are you talking about? But
I've been here for 10 years. I mean, it's like, the also thing is, like, not everybody has the same criteria by which they're measuring things. I mean, it's just, I think that what I came up with when I was like, okay, I'm going to look mostly at my sources that I trust the most, and then I would do a little averaging. What I came up with is that I think everybody should be prepared for 10 years. You should be prepared. Hey, if it's not, I'm Gen X through and through. I feel better if I prepare myself for disappointment. And then I might be pleasantly surprised. Like this has made life better. So, and then if it's not 10 years, you'll be elated. And if it's 10, you'll have been ready. And if it's more than 10, you'll be like, of
course, right.
But at least you'll have gotten, maybe halfway there.
Right. So I'm going to combine a couple of things here. One of the questions is, this is the first gender inclusive book about menopause, which is super exciting because of shifting standards of care. More trans men than ever may choose to retain their reproductive organs into middle age. Is there much information yet about what transgender men experience in perimenopause?
There's none.
There's none. Yeah.
And it's there's plenty that's anecdotal. If you talk to your friends, right? There's plenty that's anecdotal, and we're gathering as we go in everybody's stories and in support groups, and that's happening. I think the other thing to know is that if nobody's doing a medical transition, right? If you're just talking about the physics of things, the physics of things are the same for everybody. But when you're talking about kind of how it is emotionally and certainly socially, this is right now, we're in collective storytelling. My kingdom, though, like that is a thing that should be shouted far and wide to anybody who wants to be doing trans health research. Because I'll say that even just as a non-binary person working in this, having to research in this, it sucks. It's really painful to have to talk about this and even try and ask people questions and be misgendered. And, I'm not particularly dysphoric, and it's really fucking hard. So research would be amazing.
I found when I was researching emotions, right, and their impact on our bodies. Virtually no intersectional data sources at all. Everything extremely rigid, extremely binary, extremely heteronormative. All of the lines and the boxes and the rules are set up so it's data in, data out, and very little. It's a huge issue, I think, data in this way. But can you relate that broadly to the medical profession in general? I remember personally going to my doctor and saying, I think that I'm perimenopausal, and my doctor saying, no way, you're just too young, or, absolutely not, that's just impossible. And I'm thinking, no, actually, I think this is correct. But there was also that kind of dismissal, like, no, you have to be 50 years old. And,
No. Well, that's the thing, is that most healthcare providers still don't have any education, which is so funny. Especially to me, I can't tell you how many times as a sex educator that people would be like, you shouldn't be doing that. You're not a doctor. They'd be like, do you understand that almost no doctors have any sex education? People are lucky I'm not a doctor. I know what I'm talking about, but I'm like, how did I come into something else? Where again, it's the same thing. You're not a doctor. That I'm like, and it's a damn good thing that I'm not a doctor, because most of them, not all of them, obviously, there are a few doctors right now, but by and large, most doctors don't know shit about this, or are operating, or are, again, much like with sexuality information, are operating under outdated assumptions, or information. It's it's just
super frustrating.
Well, it's really frustrating, especially at a time of life and in a thing that is in and of itself so maddening and frustrating. You're just trying to get across the finish line of all this bullshit, right? You know what I mean? Like, so much of it is like, I just want out of this universe. Right? To me, I don't know why. I think I had it in my head that it seems so silly in hindsight. I had it in my head that menopause was escape from sexism. And I know better, right? I know better.
Wouldn't that be nice though?
To some degree, right? I think I just thought maybe I would just
I'm done with all that.
less of it, right? Like there would be less of it that I'd have to deal with. And so that you have to, there's like a swell, an extra swell of it that you have to deal with on the way out is garbage. It's
amazing, right? It is. And then, and
acceptable, not acceptable, especially right now.
And I think a lot of people, as you just said, are blindsided by that.
Totally.
And it comes in tandem for a lot of women. I just this week I was talking to some women, and they were really struck by, you know, they articulate this feeling of invisibility, like I might as well not even be here. Is a way a lot of them were, you know, these were all women, and they were all saying this, but the confluence of those things, as you said, which is, and the sexism, it's really, you know, I think, as you just said, for non-binary people, for trans people, there's a different quality to it. There's a different magnitude to it, especially, I think, navigating the medical system. But yeah, I think that the changes that people go through just blindside them, because, you know, which is why I'm so grateful you're talking about it, you're writing about it. There's a comment here from Melissa. It comes together with other aging issues, lines, wrinkles, sagging, a belly, losing our periods can add to that. Not that I've minded being over it as much as I wanted to get it when I was young. So can you maybe, I don't know if this is something you can talk about, but I think because of the prevalence of sexualization in the culture and sexual objectification, when you said maybe you'd be done with sexism, was that related to maybe being done with sexualization that was unwanted and that was
I know better.
Yeah.
I know better there. I don't think that's what it was. I think that for me, you know, I have not been concerned about invisibility. I have been looking forward to invisibility, you know, and so I'm kind of like, well, where is it? Like, I'm ready. Give it.
Yeah, give it, hand it over.
I don't want some. I want the whole thing, right? Like a little is not, no, a little is worse. Right? Like I need all of it. I need all of it.
Well,
kind so I can rob banks.
That's so funny. All right, I don't know if you can see these comments, but let's see. So we have aging.
I see something in passing that I might have misunderstood what it said, but I want to quickly say it just from a health standpoint. Somebody said that you might get your period a year or two after your periods have stopped for a year. And I just want to make sure that anyone here knows that after your periods have stopped for a year, you absolutely should not get anything like your period again. In fact, if you are, it's a medical OB-GYN universally agreed thing. If you have any kind of vaginal bleeding at all that you are not sure, this absolutely from like a fissure from not using enough lube or whatever, you should march to the doctor right away, because that can actually be a uterine cancer sign. So no, once periods have stopped, they cannot fully stop.
I will add to that, because that actually happened to me, and I had to have uterine biopsies, and it is by far the most painful thing I ever experienced. By far.
Yeah.
And I can't stress this enough, if this happens, make sure that you talk to your doctor about pain mitigation, you know, because the description that you'll feel a little cramp is laughable, you know, and it turned out that it was okay, but I had to do it 3 times.
Oh, that's a whole conversation, whether it's IUD insertion or
all of it. That's exactly it.
Stand up for your right to have pain control.
Yeah. And there's also, let's see. Oh, I think this is Therese. Hello. As a postmenopausal woman, I'm totally pissed off about sudden hair loss, bone density loss, and weight girth gain. Can you talk about the changes that happen to people's bodies that are sort of known changes? And I think those are 3 pretty known changes. Maybe I'm wrong, but
yeah, I mean, God, there's so many of them. Yeah, I mean, hair changes. I mean, bone density. That's just that's a given. You know, from here until death, bigger in the middle. That's the way it goes. Our lean mass and our fat mass kind of shifts usually, or, you know, we get more of one and less of another one. Dry skin. I mean, this is going to sound like you guys are all going to be like, thanks, bye. You know, I mean, like there's just, and it depends on what and who you are and what you have going on. Itchiness, kind of feeling itchy in your skin, more allergy issues. Some people have more allergy issues. Again, it depends. Sometimes your own health stuff that you have can kick back up, or sometimes your own health stuff can help you out. You have to look at, I mean, I think the biggest thing to know about a lot of this stuff you'll see in the book, it's listed there. You know, it's stuff that we've had dry skin. We know how to deal with dry skin. If we're working on accepting our bodies, we know how to do that before. Really, the stuff we want to think about is the stuff we actually have to like watch out for, like our blood pressure rising and stuff like our bone density, and making sure that we're talking to our doctor just to do the things, and we do the calcium things.
Can you talk about how you organized the book?
Sure.
Just maybe a quick overview. I always find it interesting how writers decide to pull all the information they have together. Like in my case, it was sort of life stages and how emotions are treated over life.
Yeah, it wasn't so easy in this case, because one of the tricky things is that when you start looking into this, when you start looking into the stuff particularly that happens with menopause and perimenopause, there's two ways that there's a lot of it that comes down to like everybody's attitude. Right? Like that's one thing, which makes you pretty much want to kick everybody in the shins. But a lot of the like, and everybody's negative attitude, right? It's like all of a sudden being with your third grade teacher again, who's telling you that it's just your bad attitude. But the fact of the matter is that we all mostly do have a bad attitude, because the history of this has been horrific. Right. And has literally made sure that we had a bad attitude. Now, whether or not that changes anything, who knows? But I like for us to know what we're walking in the door with. So I wanted to make sure that there was a history there. And that's after talking about my own shit. But the other thing is that when you start looking into what you can do about all these things that are happening to you, if you're feeling like trash, you inevitably run into what sounds like this very annoying, stupid basic advice, like that you need to sleep better, and that you need to like this stuff, and that you need to exercise, and that you need to manage your stress. And it all sounds really flip and patronizing. And the problem is that when you look this basic stuff up, it's actually the stuff that is most associated with working. And so as much as I hate it, that is true, because it is really annoying. You know, I wanted to put all that stuff in there first, and what we can actually do about it, because that stuff also is free. Right. Mostly. It's accessible. Right. Like help, like it's all pretty, you know, talking to other people, moving our bodies when we can, you know, sleeping some more, like resting, you know, being less stressed out. Like it's all good for us, objectively good for us, pretty universally good for us. It doesn't, you know, play poorly with other medications, you know what I mean? Like, so it's accessible. So I want to put that in there. And then I just wanted to go through the stuff that happens and what we can do about the stuff that happens, and also make sure that it wasn't just hot flashes and, you know, how big your butt is and, you know, that, but also things like, again, like our mental health and how it impacts existing illnesses and pain, and our interpersonal relationships, you know, and work, you know, how we're supposed to go to work. And then I just kind of, you know, I wanted to talk about my hopefulness for after. You know, I'm not on the other side. I was telling Soraya before we came in that I have a month and a half to go. So does Mona Altahawi, by the way. If Mona and I, if we can both make it middle of October without a period,
Yeah, then you'll be there.
we'll have crossed this bridge where everyone tells me it's better. And so help me God, if it's not, I'm coming for every single fucking one of them.
You know, it's funny though, because I think, like, I remember when I got my period thinking, oh my God, it's going to go on forever. This is forever, right? And then when it stopped, I genuinely celebrated.
Yeah.
Like, genuinely celebrated, you know? And it is totally great. It's just like,
everybody says, but just
yeah.
no. Now
Yeah,
I come for you first.
Well, I think it's amazing that we got 50 minutes into this before you said the word hot flashes.
Well, I mean, it's just, you know, it is common, but it is not necessarily the hardest thing you deal with. It can certainly
And many people don't.
annoy,
Many people don't. Yeah.
you know, but I mean, I know, I hate them. And I've definitely been a real pain in my ass, but, you know, they weren't making me cry
Right.
for 4 days out of every 7 for several years, like my depression was. So.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people, I think, and again, this is a lack of information. They think, well, it can't be perimenopause, or it can't be if I don't have hot flashes.
Right.
And that's just not the case. You know, a lot of people don't get them at all.
You can also be having them from something else. You know, I already had a different version of them because of having a pain disorder. Also, as somebody with seizure disorders, you know, my neurological system does weird shit all the time.
Yeah.
You know? So sometimes too, I think it's one of those things. Hot flashes can even sometimes be like, I feel like I've had the conversation with those I've had with some people around orgasm, where it's like sometimes hard to explain to somebody what it is, because we don't necessarily all have the same physical experience of things. Even I think that's one where you get this thing where they say, oh, in some cultures they don't have them. And that's necessarily true, as though maybe in some cultures we're not explaining things right because we're not having the same physical experience of something. Like,
that's so interesting. So I just want to give everybody a heads up. We have about 10 minutes left, 8 to 10 minutes, if there are any more questions. I've tried to sort of integrate the comments as we've gone. There is another one here from Melissa. Whatever you do, do not go off hormones for menopause cold turkey. I'm so sorry to hear that, Melissa. My grandmother did and had a heart attack, and that should have killed her and caused ongoing problems. We also really haven't talked about hormones and hormone replacement therapy. How big a part of your research was that? Because it's been so controversial over decades, sort of the cyclical nature of the question of hormones and hormone replacement.
So they usually call it menopausal hormone therapy now. I usually just like to say that for people so they know if they're doing research to find what's current. You know, I did a lot of it because I wanted to make sure that, you know, again, you know, part of what I do in everything I do is kind of try and give simplified medical information. That's what people can feel like, oh, I have it all now. But so people have enough so that when they go to their doctor and their doctor starts talking, it's not like, this stuff going over their head. They have a foundation. So I wanted to know what was right and what was wrong. And some of that was looking into the history, which is places where it, you know, it turns out that a lot of us kind of think we know a thing that probably most people thought are mistaken. And also that, you know, now even the hormone therapy that we misunderstood, most of us misunderstood how it was being represented, is still a lot like with birth control pills between the 60s and the 70s and now is also really different. You know, medications are all different now. The protocols are all different now. There's more options than there were before. There's more ways to do it on now. People, I mean, if they're getting the kind of healthcare that we be getting, people are monitored in a different way than they are now. You know, I mean, it's just, it's such a different landscape, the way that hormone therapy is even done. And, you know, look, people can also, by the way, if people want to think whatever they think about inclusive stuff, people can thank trans health for a lot.
For a lot of that, right?
So anybody out there that doesn't like inclusivity in their menopause stuff and is using hormone therapy, you can thank a trans woman for that, friend.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of this.
Well.
Yeah. I mean, that's the data, honestly, that
I mean, but this is right. I'm like, these are the groups of people that have been basically, this is who's been working to change these protocols. But so it's different. People have more options than they do. I mean, when I'm not somebody that can do hormones, and I went into this, I really thought that the only option, even for hormone therapy, was just you take estrogen or you don't take estrogen.
Yes.
Right. And that there's one way of taking estrogen. And it's not just estrogen, right? It can be estrogen, it can be progesterone, it can be testosterone, it can be a combination, it can be things. And then there's a million different ways that you can do this, right? None of it necessarily has to be systemic. It can be local. I mean, it's one of the, and it's not something where somebody has to go on it and then you're on it forever. That absolutely will generally not be the case with hormone therapy for menopause. And anything is also stoppable, like it's one of the things you don't have to make a commitment to it forever just because you can try a thing and then be like, oh, you can microdose. I mean, just like everything else is microdosing, you can microdose with hormones. So I did, and it's in there. And it's just, I think it's one of those things that I'd say to people, especially if people are having any kind of a hard time and it's not something that they've considered. Unless they know that it's harmful for them or their doctor's telling them, I think it is totally worth a conversation to see about it for sure, because it helps a lot of people. Right. A lot of ways to do it.
And they are the science, like, I don't know if the sort of bioidentical hormone science, I'm looking forward to learning more about it. But it is much more customized to people now than certainly was even possible 20 years ago.
Well, that's mostly marketing language, but that's about any kind of hormone therapy.
That's true of any kind of hormone therapy.
All of it is wholly custom. Yeah, it's a whole different ballgame.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
so before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to tell people, or that you have advice for people? Anything really about the book that you want them to know?
Oh God. I mean, this too shall pass. Literally. I mean, that is really the good news, right? Like, it is something that ends.
It is something that's
well, whenever, there were like some books I liked reading on this and some that I didn't. And the ones that I didn't were the ones where people would get like really high on themselves to be like, well, this is how I got myself to the end of this. And I'm thinking, well, no, you got yourself to the end of this because it ends, man.
That's true.
But that's the good thing to know is that, it ends. It ends.
There's an end. There's an end.
End. And you don't have to figure out how to end it. It will
just end. This is work you don't have to do.
You might have to do a lot of figuring out of like how to get there and get through. But like, you don't have to be like, how do I stop this thing? Like that actually,
it'll take care of itself.
Thank God.
So I'm going to wrap this up and ask ER to come back. Thank you so much for writing this book and for all of your work and for this conversation.
Thank you.
I'm just thrilled that we had the chance to do this. Hello.
Hello. Thank you both so much. I am really grateful to you, Heather, for all of your work. I feel like, no joke, we just send people your way nonstop. Your work has been such a gift to so many people, and I feel like this book is really important because there is so much research that continues to need to be done, and it's pretty infuriating that is the case, but I am really grateful that you have shared as much information as you have shared for the last 20 plus years. So thank you. And Soraya, we love your book as well. Thank you so much. I'll be dropping the link to Soraya's book in the chat. You can click the teal link at the bottom center of the screen to buy What Fresh Hell Is This from Charis.
Buy
it. Yes, please buy it for a friend.
Soraya's in it too.
buy it. Yeah, send it to family, friends. I think
Mailman,
whoever. Encourage your public
Hand
library.
it out on the sidewalk.
Yeah, I mean, we think like always, encourage your local library to carry it, encourage college libraries to carry it, so that the first time people hear about this topic isn't when they are already experiencing it. It really does help. So please do try and get the word out about this book. We really love it. And I will also be adding captions to this and putting it up on our YouTube page. So keep an eye out for that. And if you are not already a fan of Charis, please do follow us on all social media. We are at Charis Books and More most places, and at Charis Circle on Twitter. So thank you again to both of you. This has been truly lovely, and I hope that you stay as well as possible.
You too. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.